It's a great pleasure and a privilege to be with you this morning. David, in my own journey, has been a wonderful source of encouragement, insight, and wisdom to me. So I feel a particular sense of privilege and honour to be with you this morning, and that David's asked me to preach here and next week. And I often do sing during my sermons as hopefully something that is able to break up the monotony a little bit of a sermon usually, but I hope that can be encouraging. I promise I'm not terrible. So please pray with me. Speak, O Lord, as we come today to receive the food of your holy word. Take your truth, plant it deep in us, shape and fashion us in your likeness, that the light of Christ might be seen today in our acts of love and our deeds of faith. Speak, O Lord, and fulfill in us all your purposes for your glory. So, in my own journey of faith, I, for the most part, have come through the Sydney Anglican Church. And I found myself as something of a Christian church refugee into Leichhardt Uniting Church some years ago when I started to come to terms with my own identity as a young gay man. One of the really difficult struggles I always had with theology in the Anglican Church was a sense that biblical exegesis wasn't actually really grounded in the everyday or in the everyday experience. The church can spend a lot of time talking about transformation, but it wasn't able to actually articulate what transformation meant. And if it isn't able to do that, what's the point of theology or having sermons? My experience of that part of the church was a lot of talk of sin, death, and crucifixion in an introspective way, and not a lot on hope, renewal, and reconciliation. My experience of the conservative evangelical church is transformation as internal and introspective, and responding to what is essentially a list of rules. And so I'm very grateful now to be a part of the church that talks about transformation as wholesale. So it's internal and external. It's a framework for how I understand the world, and it's transformative for how I relate to myself, others, and the wider world that God has created. So what I want to do today and next week, is to understand how we can relate to these passages that we've read in a really practical way. And we'll get into some biblical exegesis, and I'll tell some stories. So there are two broad umbrellas that my sermon for this week and next week fit under. One is what's called Sabbath economics, and the other one is abundance thinking. And they're intertwined concepts, and I'm going to break them down. So in our world today, we are constantly told that there is not enough. Economics at its very core, not even capitalism, but economics, is defined as the distribution of limited resources amongst unlimited needs and wants. And we're told that the free market is perfect and it shouldn't be intervened with. Don't mess with the free market. The government should be small and quit intervening in people's lives so we all get bigger tax refunds to spend. Budget surpluses are a holy grail for governments and are seen as essential to economic growth and a stable market, with the undercurrent being that we should save because there isn't enough to go around. But politicians aren't economists. And at the same time, we're living in a period where governments are ignoring the effects of climate change. They're still determined to dig up coal out of the ground. While there's plenty of renewable energy, and it's a growing industry and a genuine alternative, we throw out perfectly good food every day from our supermarkets, while there are people all around the world who go hungry, and there are many people sleeping rough in our communities, in our society, and there are many people living in homes with empty rooms. And we turn away people seeking asylum because they're jumping queues and stealing our jobs. So my question is there really not enough, or are we just acting like there isn't? And here enter the Jews wandering the desert, and God is blessing them with manna from heaven. If you're a young person like me, manna is a strange kind of word. So for anyone who's not entirely clear, manna is essentially bread. If you're a video game nerd like me, manna has a very different meaning. So God blesses the Jews with manna from heaven, and there is enough for everyone, and there is enough to meet their need. And when the Jews try to take more for themselves out of their own anxiety that there is not enough, the bread rots, and there are maggots. So in this tiny little moment, we're shown God's imagining for a completely different economic system where everybody has enough and there is too much for nobody. But Andrew, I hear you say, how can there possibly be enough for everybody? It's just not possible. Hold that thought, we're going to come to it. If there's nothing else to take away from today, let it be that there is enough for everyone and too much for nobody. You don't even have to agree with the idea. I just encourage you to sit with it and to think about it. This is one of the examples theologian Ched Myers writes about to help us understand what Sabbath economics is. And it's called Sabbath economics because it goes back to fundamentally how we understand the purpose of creation. The constant grind of capitalism and living in a city like Sydney can easily create the message that the purpose of our existence is to work, and that the only reason for resting is so we can go back to work. But this isn't the premise that we're given in Genesis. At the beginning of Genesis 2, we're told that God rested from all the work he had done. But this wasn't just rest so he could go back to work. It was rest so that the work that he had done could be enjoyed. It was rest so creation could be enjoyed. It was rest and non-participation so the land itself could rest. Genesis sets us up with a completely different premise to the subdue and exploit narrative given to us in our world today. And if we continue to read Genesis 2, it paints this abundant picture of God's creation as we read about the abundance of the garden and all of the rivers God has made. So Genesis sets us up with a new way to understand the world and our relationship to it. And Exodus, in this passage, provides us with a practical way that this works out. Where the world says limited resources and unlimited needs and wants, Exodus shows us that there is enough for everyone if we exercise self-restraint. This is part of an abundance mindset. This is the transformative part. It's a reframing of how we think about the world. The world is abundant, not unlimited. There is enough if we exercise self-restraint. But because God has tasked us with stewarding the world and looking after each other, it begins with understanding that the world is a precious gift. And when we are given precious gifts, we nurture them, we take care of them, we love them. But instead, what we have done is we have set up systems in our world of private ownership. And it's through this lens of private ownership that we can become uncaring and ungrateful and entitled. It's a significant shift, and it might seem a little bit hippy-dippy from the young guy up on the stage with the microphone who's got piercings in his ears, but it is a profoundly different way to understand the way that we relate to the world and each other. And it requires from us vulnerability, courage, and humility. And it is part of what we are called to on the road of discipleship. So I've talked a lot about the Old Testament, and I want to just touch on the passages in Luke to sort of drive this home. So the part that we read of the Lord's Prayer in Luke is the original Lord's Prayer, and then what gets added to that was actually was added later by people, which was something that I only learnt recently from my colleague Jenny Ducker. And one of those new parts that was added was, "Give us today our daily bread." And that line is actually an explicit reference to this story of manna from heaven. "Give us today our daily bread" is a reflection on that. And the key in that phrase is "give us today." These words operate on the same premise of what's written about in Exodus. Take what you need for today. Live by faith that God, in abundance of creation, will provide for you. Give us today. Take what you need and no more, because there is enough for everyone and too much for nobody. So I've talked today a lot about the theology behind these ideas and on a big picture scale. And so next week I'm going to talk about this concept a little bit more on a more micro level, what it means for us personally and how we can relate to it. But I want to finish today with a story and then a song. So I would do a disservice today if I got up here talking about transformation with a hint of environmentalism if I didn't talk about the climate strike on Friday, the 20th of September, which was Friday a week ago. There we are. So 300 Uniting Church members packed into Pitt Street Uniting Church, and 60 staff from Uniting joined us at the Domain to strike for action on climate change. Over the last couple of months, my colleague Natalie and I have been working with our university students to put the service together at Pitt Street and to turn out the church for the action. We did a lot of training with them on the practices of community organising, how to do turnout, what makes a good action, the importance of relationships, and how to evaluate our work. And I also did a Bible study with them on this concept of Sabbath economics. Because in the space of climate justice and environmentalism, the church has an incredibly important role to play in the public square, because we are the only institution that I can think of that talks and thinks about transformation. And we have the social capital for people to listen to us. In times gone by, it has been the church that has led the charge on social change and called the world to shift its moral compass. If our world is to truly confront the crisis facing us, we are going to have to radically think the way that we organise our world. The school strike for climate in Australia is based around 3 demands. So number 1 is no new coal or gas. This is because a bunch of Australia's coal mines are set to close in the next few years, and coal plants have a lifespan of decades. So now is a good time to transition. Number 2 is 100% renewables by 2030. That's ambitious, but it's a straightforward enough idea. And number 3 is to stop the Adani coal mine. Now, in my view, these are all worthy goals, but within them there is some semblance of, if we just change these things, then we'll be fine. They're still a big ask and contain a restructuring of how we source our energy, but they don't contain a rethink on how we redistribute resources. The forces of corporate greed and capitalism, the history of colonialism, the lack of reverence and the disrespect we have shown to our first peoples all over the world, and the lack of self-restraint in our economic thinking in the West have led the charge for environmental degradation, overconsumption, and have brought us to the verge of ecological catastrophe. As Greta Thunberg said this week at the UN Climate Summit, entire ecosystems are on the verge of collapse, and we are at the beginnings of a mass extinction. Without a global conviction that we are all in this together, and fundamentally need to rely on each other and to call each other to self-restraint in the way that we consume our resources, we are going to be in serious trouble. But the hope for the world is in the church's ability to call our leadership to accountability and transformation in telling them there is enough for everyone and too much for nobody. That's quite a full-on message to end a sermon with. So I'm going to take a deep breath, and I invite you to do that with me. And I'm going to sing a song for us to finish. So this is a song that I learnt from my time with the Cafe of Gate of Salvation choir, and it's an old African-American spiritual, and it goes like this. Come and go to that land. Come and go to that land. Come and go to that land where I'm bound. Oh, come and go to that land. Come and go to that land. Come and go to that land where I'm bound. Nothing but love in that land. Nothing but love in that land. Nothing but love in that land where I'm bound. Nothing but peace in that land. Nothing but peace in that land. Nothing but peace in that land where I'm bound. Oh, where